Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at our Senator Markey's webinar on unlocking clean energy opportunities for higher education institutions. My name is Katie. I'm one of the Senator staffers here in his Boston office, and we're pleased to welcome you. The Senator will be coming to us at the end of today's webinar to deliver closing remarks, but I'm pleased to share we have a fantastic program before then. We'll first hear from the Department of Treasury with a presentation about the opportunities that are currently available and how to access them. Then we will hear from Smith College and Dartmouth College to hear about projects that they are already implementing or in the process of implementing on their campuses, utilizing some of what the Treasury will be talking about today. And then finally, we'll also hear from the Dan McNulty with the Massachusetts Building Trades to hear about union components in this work. Then we'll have a Q&A opportunity, and then finally we'll be joined by Senator Markey. So first with the Treasury, we will start hearing from David Eckenthal. So we can pull up David's slides now, and David, you are good to start whenever you are ready. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, Katie. Thank you. Thanks everybody else for joining. I'll start by saying I'm really excited to hear what the folks from Smith and Dartmouth have to say about how they're actually putting into action some of the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act related to direct pay and related to clean energy. I always tell folks, I think that direct pay is this very novel, very unique, and potentially transformative provision of federal law, but the real implementation work is being done on the ground in communities around the country. So I'm excited to be here. We can go to the next slide. So one of the first things that you learn when you start working with the Department of the Treasury is this mandatory disclaimer. So I am not providing anyone on this call today with tax advice, and this is not in and of itself tax guidance. What I really want to talk about today is sort of an overview of the direct pay or elective pay provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act and how they potentially apply to higher education institutions. There is an incredible amount of information on the Department of Treasury website, on the IRS.gov website, on the White House website, and in the last slide of this presentation provides some of those resources, and happy to share that with everybody participating. You go to the next slide. So in many ways, higher education has been making the sorts of investments in clean energy that are now where direct pay and elective pay is now available as a funding resource. Higher ed institutions have been making these sorts of investments for years. Actually, earlier this year, Secretary Yellen visited Roxbury Community College in Boston, where she learned about ambitious clean energy projects that were already underway at that campus. And what the Inflation Reduction Act really does is help to accelerate the pace of clean energy investment. And it does so by making many higher education institutions that are not subject to the federal income tax eligible for clean energy tax credits for the first time. You could go to the next slide. So quick background and introduction, right? So the Inflation Reduction Act is the largest investment in clean energy in U.S. history. And the reason that I'm here talking with you all today is because most of that investment is actually coming through the tax code. It's coming through a series of tax incentives. There are about 20 different tax provisions that were a part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And those incentives are working, right? We have seen literally hundreds of billions of dollars in investments in clean energy and clean energy manufacturing, and really an overall transition to the clean energy economy over the last couple of years, and with private sector investment, and that has largely been driven by some of the tax credit provisions of the IRA. You go to the next slide. What is elective pay? What is direct pay? So the way that I like to talk about this is what direct pay or elective pay does, and yes, there are two names for the same thing. Direct pay and elective pay are exactly the same thing. What direct pay really is a way of widening the playing field when it comes to investment in clean energy. So as I said, there are all of these provisions of the tax code that are applicable to the private sector. There are also a series of provisions in the tax code that incentivize investments in clean energy by individual households, consumers. But in order to achieve the goals around clean energy, the goals around reduction in emissions, in order to further incentivize this overall transition, these incentives have to somehow reach the other parts of the economy that don't typically pay taxes, right? So nonprofit institutions, government institutions. So that what direct pay really does is widen the playing field so that those institutions, including obviously many higher education institutions, are able to access the same sorts of financial incentives through tax credits that the private sector and that individual households and consumers are able to access. That's really what direct pay does. It is not a grant program. Frequently, I'll be on these webinars, and folks on the call, particularly local governments or nonprofits, certainly true for higher ed institutions, are used to be in a position of, oh, in order to get this federal funding, we have to go through a competitive grant process. We have to apply in response to a lengthy notice of funding opportunity. That's not what direct pay is. I have a colleague who basically says, if you earn the credit, you get it. And that's really how direct pay works. That's how tax credits work for the private sector. That's how direct pay works for the nonprofit and for the governmental sector as well. So it's unique from competitive grant programs. It can work with competitive grant programs, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But because it's not competitive, because it's not capped in most cases, it really is this extraordinary potential source of funding for these types of investments. You go to the next slide. So as you think about direct pay, and the tax credits, I really encourage folks to think about sort of three different questions, right? One is my organization covered by direct pay? Am I a so-called applicable entity? Two, am I making investments or purchases that meet some of the requirements that are the underlying requirements of the 12 tax credits out of the 20 or so in IRA, the 12 where direct pay applies? And then when you're thinking about, well, just how significant is the potential resource from the federal government here, thinking about which, if any, of the bonus provisions under the Inflation Reduction Act might be applicable here. So the first question, right, is my organization an applicable entity? You could see that states and local governments are applicable entities, but so are the agencies and instrumentalities of state and local and tribal and territorial governments. So that when you think about public universities, public community colleges, frequently they'll come in under eligibility there. But there's also a wide range of nonprofit organizations, as long as it's described in sections 501 through 530 of the tax code, they also would meet the requirement for being an applicable entity that could use direct pay. Interesting, less applicable here, but to higher ed institutions per se, but there really is an opportunity for extraordinary collaboration at the local level across all of the different applicable entities, including higher ed institutions. A good example of the breadth of who's eligible as an applicable entity. I was in Georgia talking to a group of mayors about a month or so ago, and after my talk, one of the mayors came over to me and said, I had no idea that my city could file for these tax credits, but I knew about the tax credits because my church is doing a solar installation, and we know that we're getting some of the cost of that investment back through direct pay. So question number one, is my organization an applicable entity when it comes to direct pay? And in the case of many higher ed institutions, if they're nonprofit or if they're public, you meet that first test. You go to the next slide. So as I said, there are really 12 different tax credits where direct pay applies. And one way to think about them is they cut across 4 different categories. So there are a whole series of tax credits related to energy generation and carbon capture. There are some credits related to manufacturing. There are some credits related to fuel, and there are some credits related to vehicles. For most of the entities that I wind up talking to about direct pay, the biggest areas of investment are really these energy generation credits. So the investment tax credit, the production tax credit, that go into the things like investments in solar or geothermal, where you're creating new systems to provide energy. And I think these are some of the areas where both presenters from Smith and Dartmouth may talk about their projects. The other area where there's a lot of interest and where I would say there's sort of been the most initial uptake on direct pay has been related to clean vehicles. You go to the next slide. So there is a credit for qualified commercial clean vehicles. Think about EVs. There is also a credit available for alternative fuel vehicle refueling property. Think about charging equipment, right? So again, those areas, sort of the investment tax credit, sometimes the production tax credit, and then the credits around vehicles, either the purchase of EVs or the installation of charging equipment, are the ones that most people tend to focus on. You go to the next slide. So what types of projects might be eligible for direct pay or elective pay? Well, I think this is true for colleges and universities. It's certainly true for a number of other applicable entities. I think the way to think about this is if you have buildings and if you have a fleet of some sort or another, there are projects that you may be already doing or certainly that you're already planning that where direct pay, elective pay could be a potential source of funding, right? So again, thinking back to the categories of the credits that I just talked about, things like rooftop solar or solar farms or wind farms. In the case of the investment tax credit, battery storage projects, And as I said, all sorts of charging station investments and investments in clean vehicles. These are all the types of investments or projects or purchases where direct pay or elective pay can provide federal dollars in support of that investment. We can go to the next slide. Right, so remember, I said there are three sort of questions to be asking yourself about direct pay. First, do I meet the requirements of being an applicable entity? We talked about that. Nonprofits, public higher ed. Generally, the answer then is yes. Am I making the sorts of investments or purchases that meet some of the underlying requirements of some of the tax credits where you could use direct pay? We talked about those sorts of projects. The third question, right, and it's a reasonable question, is how much money are we talking about here? What are the dollar amounts like? And to answer that question, consideration of some of the different bonus provisions under the IRA are particularly important. And I think we're going to hear good specific examples about this actually from Smith and Dartmouth and how they've sort of stacked these different bonuses. But the way that I think about it is there's an important bonus provision related to the type of labor and the way in which labor is used in the construction of a project. So significant bonus depending on the size of the project if you're paying workers prevailing wage, and if you're getting a percentage of the workforce on a project from a registered apprenticeship program. There's also a bonus directly related to the types of materials used in a project. So there's a bonus around domestic content. And then there are two bonus provisions that are related to the location of a project. So there is a bonus related to projects located in an energy community. And an energy community can mean one of a variety of different things. The Department of Energy has done a really good job mapping out different energy communities around the country. But in addition to areas where there may have been historic high reliance on fossil fuel industry for employment, or where there may have been coal mining, or there may have been a coal-fired power plant, brownfield sites are eligible for the energy community bonus as well. And then the exception to the no competition general rule when it comes to direct pay is there is an allocation process for certain bonuses for different types of projects in low-income communities. So we go to the next slide. So practically speaking, what does this all look like? So the credits and the dollar amounts around investment in fleet and fleet-related activity are pretty straightforward. There is a credit of up to $7,500 for lighter vehicles, right? So think about a basic sedan. That credit goes up to $40,000 for vehicles of 14,000 pounds or greater. So imagine larger school buses, and there are a whole series of investments being made in the electrification of bus fleets. And then up to a 30% credit on investment in eligible EV charging equipment. And remember, it's uncapped in the sense that it's not 30% and you could just do one EV charging station. You could do multiple EV charging stations. It's not just $7,500 if you do if you do just one light vehicle. You could replace your entire fleet with light vehicles, and it's $7,500 for each one. So you can begin to see the significance of all of this. The dollar numbers become even more significant when we're starting to talk about investments in clean energy. So that because all of those different bonuses could stack atop one another, for a larger project where the investment tax credit might start at 6%, well, if you meet the prevailing wage requirements and the apprenticeship requirements, that could go to 30%. There's a 5 times multiplier. It could add another 10 percentage points if you meet the domestic content requirement. It could add still another 10 percentage points if it meets the location requirement in terms of an energy community. You can add on top of that another 10% or 20% if you meet the requirements under the low-income communities bonus. Go to the next slide. Right. One of the things that I like to emphasize, because I'm a former local government finance officer and worked with budget and finance issues for many years. One of the things that I like to emphasize about these sorts of investments is it's not just that the federal government with this significant, maybe 50% investment tax credit is reducing the cost of the upfront capital investment, though that's obviously important, and it is. These are the sorts of investments that will produce, in many cases, ongoing, recurring operating savings as well. So you look at some of the research that the Department of Energy has done around what happens when you do fleet electrification. It produces ongoing savings on the operations and maintenance side. Go to the next one. Energy has also done a great case study actually based at Ball State University, looking at what happens when you invest in geothermal savings that produce $2 to $2.5 million annually for the investment in that case. You go to the next one. And there, at the local government side, we know that places like San Antonio are making investments in solar, not just to achieve goals related to climate, goals related to pollution, but also in order to achieve financial savings on a recurring basis over time. You go to the next slide. Very important. So remember I said that direct pay is not a competitive grant, but it can be used with competitive grants and grants of any kind. So to the extent that you're trying to think about, well, how do I put together a particular project, you can use, there's nothing in the tax code at least that precludes the use of direct pay with grants. You go to the next slide. This is a pretty good example, right, of how this would work. Let's say we're talking about a $10 million investment in a solar farm at a higher ed institution, where the higher ed institution is able to get a $2 million grant for that cost. You could still seek direct pay based on the total $10 million investment in the project, even though $2 million of that is coming from a grant. In this hypothetical, it shows getting the investment tax credit up to 40%, so that on top of the $2 million grant, you could get $4 million based on the $10 million investment overall. You go to the next slide. This walks folks through sort of the process, right? So the process really is about identifying and pursuing the qualifying project or activity, that investment that meets the underlying requirements of the tax credit. And I'll argue to you that this really begins with with looking at your capital plan, looking at your climate action plan, looking at your sustainability plan, and going through the projects that you have lined up and figuring out which of the investments you're potentially making where direct pay could potentially apply. You actually have to complete the project and put it into service. So there is an issue about bridge financing. Happy to talk about that in the Q&A, and basically the question of what do you do about cash flow? How do you finance the project before you get the credit back? Once you determine your tax year, you then have to complete a pre-filing registration. There's an IRS portal to do that, and then you file your tax return, right? And you will receive payment after the return is processed. The IRS has basically said that it's reasonable to assume that you will receive that payment within 45 days after the closing of the filing period for the tax season where you're filing. You go to the next slide. I just want to give folks a sense of where I think we are with all of this, right? This is a very, very new initiative, right? The Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law in August of 2022. Really, since then, the Treasury Department has been issuing a series of guidance and final rules around this. We know that as of mid-May, based on investments and purchases that were made last year, there have been more than 2,000 projects or facilities registered to claim elective pay for projects put into service. And I think you're going to hear some great examples of what I would call pre-adopters or early adopters, folks who were very quick to identify the opportunities under direct pay, or may have already been planning to make a whole series of investments in clean energy when the IRA was passed and direct pay then became a mechanism for financing some of that. You're going to hear about those pre-adopters or early adopters when we hear from the presenters from Dartmouth and Smith. But if you sort of come away from this going, oh my gosh, we've missed the boat somehow, didn't we miss the application deadline? I'll tell you that I think the vast majority of applicable entities really are in a beginning and planning stage. And that's okay, because unlike grant programs where there's a deadline of next Tuesday, and if you don't put in the application, you don't get the funding, Senator Markey and his colleagues in Congress were good enough to provide this 10-year runway, basically, for entities to be able to seek these credits. You go to the next slide. And this is the final one. These are a whole series of resources that are available. And again, really appreciate everyone's attention today, and look forward to your questions, and really look forward to hearing from Smith College and from Dartmouth about how they're putting all of this into practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. That was really helpful. And folks seeing the closing slide there, all those links, we will be sure to share those around after today to make them available for you to access if you would like to look further into anything that David shared today. I'm really pleased, like David teed up, that we're going to next hear from both Smith College here in Massachusetts and Dartmouth College, our friends up in New Hampshire. First, we're going to be hearing from Jill McGrath and Eric Bray over at Smith College, and then we'll hear from Martha Lawson and Matthew Tomaszewski over at Dartmouth. So we'll hand it over to you, Jill, to get us started if you want to pull your slides up on the screen now.
Can you see my slides?
They look great. Thanks, Jill, and we see you too.
Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon. We'd like to start by thanking Senator Markey and his office for inviting us to be a part of today's discussion. I'm Jill McGrath. I'm the controller here at Smith College. I am joined by my colleague, Matthew Tomaszewski. He's the Associate Vice President for Campus Planning and Sustainability. So Smith takes its responsibility to sustainability very seriously, which starts with a strong tone at the top from our president, Sarah Willie LeBreton, who I'm happy is able to join us on today's webinar. She's been a strong supporter of sustainability and the project that we have to present to you today. Matthew and I are very excited to give you some insight into our geothermal project and our experience thus far with the tax credits and navigating through that. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew, who's going to give a background on our project.
Thanks, Jill. I want to briefly describe our project, just to give some context to what we're looking at as far as the eligible credits under the IRA. Smith College, as Jill said, has long been engaged in sustainability efforts. I would say it's part of our culture. And so as we considered projects that will significantly reduce our carbon footprint, we started investigating geothermal as a possibility, specifically because we have an aging steam system. Many institutions are in a similar situation. And the investments to upkeep and maintain that are very significant. Additionally, because of our desire to look at reducing our carbon footprint, geothermal makes a lot of sense. And as Dave mentioned earlier, looking at your list of projects to identify the right one took us time. And it was decided that the geothermal distribution system was the way to go. So ultimately, we developed a district energy master plan. And with the approval of our board of trustees in May of 2022, we began the rollout of the project. And you can see on the map that we're looking at 3 overlapping phases of work. Now, I say overlapping because they are happening, phase 1 started, and then as we made progress with phase 1 and were able to apply lessons learned, we began phase 2 while phase 1 was still underway. And likewise, phase 3 now, we're starting some distribution systems on that. So all of this work is happening on contiguous property. So it's looking at the entirety of the campus, but taking an approach of doing it in a phased way. And the goal is ultimately to complete this project in 2028. You can see more of the details listed on the slide that really identify some of the processes we went through, our funding, initial debt service, and also through our own college resources. But then while we were securing that funding for the project, from the outset, the regs were issued, and we saw this opportunity to really investigate those eligibility because it's truly incentivized the project. Joe, if you could go to the next slide. So some of the benefits that we were looking at through this project is really covering the areas of environmental, operational, and financial. And I won't go into a great amount of detail here since the focus is to talk really about the actual incentivizing for the tax credits. But to give you the context, under environmental, this truly is an opportunity for us to advance sustainability in higher ed, actually, across the US. Really focusing on the reduction of our carbon footprint and those emissions, we're seeing between 80 and 90% potential reduction through this project, which very significant and actually contributes in a beneficial way to our community as well. Operationally, of course, lowering your costs for maintenance, the reliability and improvements that occur from this, and the comfort, quite frankly, through the energy system that you're using. And then ultimately, comparing those financial business as usual operations and the applicability of the geothermal technology, and seeing that over the 30-year life cycle is of a significant benefit for us, really focusing in on those initial upfront capital expenditures that we're putting into the project. And this is where learning more about the opportunities that come through the IRA tax credits really are incentivizing us to think about the way that we can pursue and reduce those costs further. I will say, just before we transition to Jill navigating us through the process, this has been a collaborative effort. Really, it's interesting in that it's not just the finance team, it's the facilities team, it's the engineers, it's our contractors, our consultants. So bringing everybody together to really contribute to our understanding of this, and then likewise opportunities like this to share what we're learning and to learn from others. With that, I'll hand it over to Jill.
Thanks, Matthew. As Matthew noted, we began our work prior to the proposed regulations being released. We decided to partner early with PwC to help assist us in performing an initial technical assessment so that we could begin to lay out the key components of the regulation framework, which would help to inform us if we were meeting those regulations and assess the potential dollar magnitude of the tax credits that was available to us. As our project is being done in phases, one of the areas of this assessment was around the energy property determination and whether our geothermal project constituted a single versus multiple energy project. Another big area of assessment was determining when construction began, as this is key in determining whether the safe harbors offered under the regulations were available to us. At the onset of our project, as we didn't know the full scope of the regulations, we worked with our general contractor to have them provide documentation to us on how they would address prevailing wage and apprenticeship, as well as domestic content requirements. With Mass being a labor-friendly state, the Mass prevailing state wage is actually higher than the federal prevailing wages. And our general contractor is tracking against those Mass wages. This is being confirmed through certified weekly payrolls from each subcontractor and monthly reporting that we receive from the general contractor. We are also working closely with the unions to ensure we can demonstrate efforts have been made to meet the apprenticeship requirements. We believe that based on our efforts, we will meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements to be eligible for this bonus credit, regardless of the safe harbor applicability to our project. On the domestic content front, all materials on site are logged and tracked for country of origin. We are obtaining certifications from vendors where possible. This is one area that we are still assessing our ability to meet the domestic content requirements and whether we'll in fact be eligible to take credit for this bonus credit. Lastly, we looked at energy community and whether we would qualify for that bonus credit, but at this time, we don't believe that we will meet those requirements. However, we'll continue to assess as we move through the process. So based on our initial assessment, we believe that we'll be able to claim somewhere between 20 to 27% of our total project costs in tax credits. The tax credit project has been greatly beneficial to Smith, as these are helping to offset higher than expected inflation on construction costs, as well as helping to offset the uncertainty in a project of this size. So as I wrap up, I will leave you with a few key takeaways. First, while tax credit work is generally a finance-focused effort, as Matthew said, the complexity of the tax credits require involvement with the project team, which should be done early to ensure that there's thoughtful planning to comply with the regulations. Second, partner with a knowledgeable consultant. The work is challenging and you shouldn't go it alone if you want to maximize your credits. We went through a limited RFP process to select a consultant, and we're very confident in choosing PwC as our partner through this process. And lastly, utilize available resources that are out there. Smith is happy to assist other colleges and universities through this process in providing our perspective. We're happy to have you reach out to either Matthew or I with any questions that you have as you navigate through your project. Thank you for allowing us to share our geothermal project and our experience with navigating through the tax credits. At this time, I am going to stop sharing and turn it over to colleagues at Dartmouth College.
Martha, you're on mute, but your slides look great.
I will start since Martha's on mute. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Bray. I'm the Director of Energy Transition with the Project Management Services Group at Dartmouth College. And my colleague, Martha Larson, is on with us as well.
Thank you, Eric. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
And I'm Martha Larson. I was a few steps ahead of Smith when I worked at Carleton College for 12 years, completing a project like this. But that was before the IRA. I was the interim program director at Dartmouth. I'm a RMF engineering director of sustainability, but was working in an interim role before Eric came on board. And the Dartmouth program is just a step or two behind Smith. So we're looking forward to sharing some insights today on how the IRA might be able to apply to the Dartmouth project. And Eric, I'll let you kick it off.
All right. Excuse me. So the Dartmouth Decarbonization Program is part of a broader climate collaborative initiative launched this year by President Baylock, which combines operational decarbonization with an elevated focus on climate-related scholarship, teaching, and campus as a living lab. Dartmouth will decarbonize its operations by transitioning our campus utility systems from a fossil fuel-based steam boilers to a program which includes the design and construction of new geo-exchange bore fields, heat pump plants, hot and chilled water distribution networks, along with the associated conversion of building heating systems from steam to hot water powered by carbon-free electricity. The overarching goal of the operational decarbonization program is to reduce our emissions to zero by 2050. This graph shows our projected carbon emissions reduction between now and 2050, with an interim goal of a 60% reduction by 2030. This effort began with an aggressive energy efficiency measures to reduce energy use in our buildings by as much as possible. This work has also had a notable impact on our carbon reductions to date. To achieve carbon zero, we will need to decarbonize our energy source. And as you can see, the next 5 to 10 years are a critical period in Dartmouth's decarbonization efforts as we implement a campus-wide energy transition. Next slide. The challenge for Dartmouth in navigating the IRA is that, like Smith, the Dartmouth Decarbonization Program is not a standalone project, but rather a complex interconnected projects that are all required to transition the campus from our fuel oil boilers to a geo-exchange heating plant and cooling systems. This slide gives you a sense of how many different components make up the system. The thermal storage and the thermal solar arrays may qualify as standalone projects, but all of the other components you see here are inherently interconnected. The new geo-exchange plants connect to bore fields. There will be new distribution piping, which will ultimately connect all the buildings. And the existing heating and exchange plant will be transitioned from steam to hot water boilers to supplement the geo-exchange system and provide critical redundancy. This slide is a campus map showing the overall scale of the program, which when complete will serve around 8 million square feet of space. We've organized the Dartmouth Decarbonization Program by creating a series of campus districts, which encompass roughly 80 buildings, which will all be connected by our campus energy system. As part of this, one more slide. As part of this program, each building will require some level of mechanical systems upgrade in order to connect and remove it from the existing steam system and connect to our new hot water geo-exchange heating system. Next slide. The good news is that the timing of Dartmouth's program aligns well with the timeline of the IRA, and we're looking forward to today's discussion as we all navigate the best ways to apply this landmark program to benefit our once-in-a-generation energy transition. And with that, I'll turn it to Martha.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So we have, like Smith, reviewed the IRA in detail. We are also getting some tax advising assistance from PricewaterhouseCoopers and also trying to bring on a little bit of legal assistance, some folks that are specifically knowledgeable about the IRA, because it's very important how we describe these requirements in our contracts with contractors. So Dartmouth is at the stage of procuring the work. Some of it is complete, but we are also still procuring the work. So both the specifications and the contracts have to be written to incorporate the prevailing wage requirements and the apprenticeship requirements and the domestic content requirements. So we're really working hard to pull together the right team. And as Jill said, this is very key to the financing plan for Dartmouth. It will help offset some of those higher than expected costs as inflation and COVID have had their impacts, and also just the inherent uncertainty in a 10-year program that unfolds over time. So we do intend to take advantage of the IRA. We are learning every day more and more. We're trying to evolve our plan for filing. And we are learning from others like this webinar and our peers at places like Smith, Princeton, Notre Dame, and other institutions who are embarking on similar aggressive decarbonization efforts.
Thank you, Katie, so much. Thank you for all of the great work that you're doing, our whole team, and partnering with all of the terrific experts from Smith College, Dartmouth, from the Massachusetts Building Trades. Thank you all to the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities in Massachusetts, the UMass system, the Massachusetts Association of Community Colleges, and the Massachusetts State College Association for spreading the word about our webinar. Today, we learned from Treasury, and thank you for that, about the clean energy and tax incentives available for higher education institutions, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, or as I like to call it, the largest climate and clean energy bill in the history of the world. And the funding is in there for all of you. And these landmark new programs make it possible for universities, community colleges, and others to fight for the future of our planet as they educate the climate leaders of our future by installing rooftop solar, electrifying their vehicle fleets, deploying electric vehicle chargers, and making energy efficiency improvements. So it's all there. And campuses have an unprecedented opportunity right now to turn their vision of climate action into reality. We learned how schools like Smith were working to replace fossil fueled heating systems with renewable geothermal using tax credits and federal support even before the IRA was passed to supercharge all of these efforts. And you also heard from the experts about what these tax credits can do. And now, as these federal investments spur new projects that create jobs, those jobs should be good paying union jobs. And that's why many of the clean energy, clean technology tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act are worth 5 times more to your campuses when developers pay workers a prevailing wage and use registered apprentices. The IRA creates good union, clean energy jobs, and that's by design. And these job standards will result in better projects, better policies, and better communities. We can and we must create a climate so that all of the world is made safe. And that does not leave behind workers while building schools to survive and succeed in a warming world. We know that students' learning environments are faculty and staff's working environment, and everyone has to be protected. The charging infrastructure, heat pump installations, and solar and energy storage systems deployed in labs, libraries, auditoriums, and dining halls will enable you to work and students to learn in safer, cleaner, and healthier environments today and for generations to come. And for the first time ever, institutions that do not pay a dime in federal taxes can get a check in hand for making green infrastructure investments thanks to the direct pay options in many of these tax credits. And with this money, institutions can cut energy costs and put every dollar saved on their bills towards the incredible work you do to educate and to prepare the next generation. So this is just the beginning, and I am really looking forward to continuing to work with you all to chart the path to a cleaner future while molding the minds of tomorrow that will lead us into that future. So if any of you have any questions as to how you can take advantage of all of these programs, you can call Katie on my staff. We have 5 staffers who are working on this issue to help to facilitate each one of your institutions' successful navigation of all of the programs that we're talking about here today. So it doesn't end here. We want to be your partner in getting the maximum benefits for your schools. And I thank Smith College President Willie Leberton, Boston City Councilor Julia Mejia, Rocco DeRico from Tufts University, Elms College President Dumais, LaSalle University President Turner, Urban College of Boston President Solomon Fernandez. Thank you all for joining. Thank all of you who have joined us today. This is just the dawn of a new clean energy era, and it's what your students want, it's what you want, and we want to be there to partner with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So we're going to continue now if our panelists are able to stay on for 1 or 2 questions. I think David needs to drop from Treasury, so we can just see. Let me just check here to see if there are any questions. Oh,
I could do one more question, Katie, and then if there are other questions for me, if you get them to me, I'm happy to work with you so that you get them out to folks.
perfect. Thank you so much, David. So I think our last question we'll do from the chat here, and our team's been capturing these questions. So if you put a question in the chat before our webinar ends today, we will make sure to get back to you. So one question that we had was, what bridge funding is available to help finance project work before direct pay is received? If anyone has any thoughts or guidance on that. What bridge funding is available to help finance project work before direct pay is received? And David, you said it can be as quick as 45 days.
Well, but you still have the construction process and then waiting till you're able to file. So it's project specific. I'm actually curious to hear how Smith. I think Smith may have talked about this a little bit in terms of their use of debt, and curious to hear what Dartmouth is doing. The other thing that's out there is, another part of the IRA was the creation of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund program. And there are a number of intermediaries now looking at finance programs, and I think all of them are looking at opportunities around bridge financing, particularly in the direct space. I know a number of different state governments. I'm not sure whether the Commonwealth is doing this, although I will tell you that I just presented on direct pay with the Commonwealth at a national convening yesterday, and they are really far ahead of a lot of other states. So they may be looking at bridge financing opportunities as well. But hopefully the great presenters from Dartmouth and Smith may have some ideas on what they have done. And with that, Katie, and with everybody, I'm gonna have to drop. But again, if Katie will get me these questions, and we'll get back to folks with answers.
Thank you, David. And we'll also be sure to share David's great slide deck, which had a lot of fantastic resources in it on that final slide. So Jill, Matthew, Eric, or Martha, defer to you if you have any thoughts, or Dan, even if you have any ideas too, feel free to jump in at large as well.
I can jump in and just say what we did. I mean, we took advantage of some favorable rates and issued a taxable bond to help us finance the project. I will say we considered making sure we stayed away from the tax exempt bond financing, because then that kind of inhibits your ability to utilize the tax credits. But it's been a great way for us to be able to have the cash flow on hand to finance our project.
Thanks, Jill. And at Dartmouth, it will be a combination of internal funds and also debt financed funds. Dartmouth set aside a infrastructure renewal fund. So specifically for this, each year it's kind of building up some available internal resources. And also, I think one of the key things is leveraging money that would be spent anyway on renewal and capital projects on the annual cycle of college renewal. So we're coupling this with a housing renewal program and other capital funds, which are just things the college needs to do anyway, but formulating those projects so that it prepares those buildings for a future connection to the GeoExchange system.
That's helpful. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Martha. And if the person who asked that question has any more follow-ups based on that, please feel free to either reach out to my office or other folks here today. But with that, I know we're over time, so thank you all who stuck around. We appreciate you being here today. We will be sure to share all of these resources that were mentioned today to make sure that they're available to you. And please do follow up with any additional questions that you have, or just to keep us in the loop about any projects that you'll be implementing on your campus. The senator and our entire team would love to know how you'll be utilizing these funds and would love to be able to support you as best as we can. So with that, thank you so much to all of our fantastic panelists today, Smith College, Dartmouth College, Dan with the Massachusetts Building Trades, and David and all of the wonderful folks over at the U.S. Treasury. We really appreciate all that you were able to share with our communities here in Massachusetts today, and are grateful to have you as leaders in our Commonwealth and up in New Hampshire, as well as partners there. So thank you all so much, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.